To introduce myself, my name is Davey D, longtime journalist, been here in the town for a long time, originally from New York. I was asked to speak about social justice, politics, and voting. And I think it's appropriate for us to have this conversation during Black History Month. And not just Black History Month, but in the year 2020. No matter what happens moving forward, the time that we're in right now, it's history. It's the type of thing that some of us used to talk about when we would read about Dr. King or Malcolm X, and we read about the Panthers and what was going on in the 1960s, and we was like, damn, I wonder what it was like back then. I wonder what was popping off then. Why did these things happen? Well, those crazy times are here. You got folks that are being locked up in cages who are little kids. That's going on right now on our watch. Of course, the news, they're showing a lot of our brown brothers and sisters being locked up who are forced to come over to this country because of our foreign policy. But make no mistake, black folks at 6 and 7 are being locked up too. It's just today they had out in the paper, a 6-year-old girl had a temper tantrum, which 6-year-olds do, in Florida. They put the cuffs on her and took her to juvenile hall. That's happening right here today. Little white kid had fit in the same school. They talked to him and sent him home. And so when we talk about politics, there's an old saying, everything is political. Everything is political. And to not be political is political. The other saying is, you can avoid politics, but politics will not avoid you. And what we mean by that is that if you're black in America, it is a political scenario that has resulted in us being here. People didn't vote to have us here, but they took us. And they created a reality that we have to deal with. So when we're talking about politics, and we narrow it down to who you're going to vote for and who you're not going to vote for, that's one aspect of it. But if you're looking at politics from the way that the world sees it and the way that I think we should see it, we're talking about who controls the economic landscape that we live in. Who controls the social landscape that we live in. And when I talk about social landscape, racism, religion, gender, all those types of scenarios, how do we engage it? How are we impacted by it? And we talk about the economic landscape. We're talking about the difference between who makes $10 an hour and who makes $15 an hour. Who gets to go to school for free? Who's in debt because they're going to school? That's all political. And how do we counter that? Who has wealth and who doesn't? We're sitting in a city where we have the highest homeless population in the entire country. They say the state of California has half the nation's homeless population. And 70% of that homeless population are black folks. How is it that we live in an area that has not one but 2 or 3 companies that have $1 trillion, you know, they brag, we're $1 trillion company. That's Apple, that's Google, that's Amazon, that's all these companies that are less than 30 miles down the street. How is it that we have that much money, but we have brothers and sisters living under every freeway in this city of Oakland? How does that happen? That's a political scenario. So when we talk about politics, I'm often fond of saying that our job is how do we engage it above and beyond voting. When I said that we were in historic times, yes, there will be an election to see if who's going to become president in 2020. Will the person that's in the White House now continue, or will we replace him with somebody new? And will that new person be somebody who reflects the values and politics that we all love and cherish? But if we just limit ourselves to that, then we're missing the larger point. What I'm looking at is, how are we going to change our day-to-day living situation? Is this making sense what I'm saying? How are we going to move from point A to point B, regardless of who's in the White House? And that's the challenge. The battle that we have right now is that there are people who hold power. They may be bankers, they may be developers, they may be politicians who have vast resources and make decisions. Some people call them the elite. And that group of people is very small in number. People call them the 1%. Their reality is vastly different than the reality of most of us. They have millions and billions of dollars, so they're not worried about where their next meal is coming from. They're not worried about whether or not they're going to have a roof over their head. They're not worried about where their kids are going to go to school. They don't have any of these problems. But the majority of us are dealing with the political landscape that they created day in and day out. Most of you all are sitting in this room right now because if you don't go to college, they told you that you're not going to be able to get a job. So everybody's here to go to college and get a degree. The challenge before us is that most people, when they're going to college, wind up getting in deep, deep debt because what used to be free is no longer free. That was a political situation caused by a 1% population that is determined to never ever have competition from the majority of us, determined to never have to deal with the masses of people being within their midst. So what they've done is created situations where several things are happening all at once. Oppression of the masses, and when I say oppression, meaning that making it very difficult for us to make a decent living. Oppression of the masses shows up in us not being able to afford a house that we own. We can rent if we can afford $3,000, $4,000 for a 1 or 2 bedroom. But owning right now for the average person where the cost of housing is $1.5 million in the hood, 3 or 4 million if you quote unquote want to move out, that's not something that most of us are going to be able to obtain. And that's not by accident, that's by design. Making education very, very expensive. So if you go and get your doctorate degree or your master's degree, it may cost more than it does for you to get a house in many places around the country. So I'm working with people right now who are still in their undergrad and owing $70,000 and $80,000 and they still got 2 or 3 years to go because they're owing loans. I have people that I graduated with that owe $300,000, $400,000 just for their masters. That's not by accident, that's by design. We have our kids, when they're not being arrested by cops in Florida or being locked up in cages, they're getting inadequate health care or they're getting inadequate child care. So you have a kid in the Bay, what is it, $1,500, $2,000 a month just to do adequate child care. How is that happening? Why is that happening? All that is somebody controlling the political landscape who doesn't want to see the average person come up and be competition to them. This is not a new phenomenon. This is a historic one. So let me give you a little bit of history. Once upon a time, in the 1600s, people came to this country as what they call indentured servants. They came here and they were like, okay, you want to leave England, you can come here and you can work for 6 or 7 years under a contract, and then you get out, we'll give you a bunch of land, and then you can become a citizen. Among those indentured servants were also some black folks who came over here. And when people came together, they realized, they said, you know, we're being exploited, we're being used, we're being abused, and this 4 or 5 year contract that we're working under is not good for us. So what we need to do is we need to change the conditions that we live under. At that time, people couldn't vote it out, so they decided to protest and actually raise up, kick up dust. So they fought, and it was this thing called the Bacon's Rebellion. And at the end of that rebellion, the elite said, you know what? We can never have this group of people ever get into a position of power again. So they instituted 2 things. They created this thing called whiteness. Said people who are from Europe, you are white people and you are better than these Africans who are dark-skinned. And these dark-skinned people are now going to be permanently enslaved. That was a way to keep people divided and to keep folks who had shared interests in terms that they were being exploited by one group of people from ever coming together. They told the white indentured servants that your job now is not to pick lettuce and not to do the farm, but to patrol and make sure that these Africans, these dark-skinned people, don't ever rise up again. So that became a legacy or a blueprint that's been followed to this day. How do you keep people divided? How do you keep people from coming together and being able to push back on oppressive situations? This making sense what I'm saying here for folks? This making sense? So we're in a scenario now where all these conditions that I described, gentrification, expensive education, inadequate health care, folks being locked up in cages, all this sort of stuff is an attempt to keep people not only divided, but to keep people so disoriented and under so much duress that they're never able to come together and change the conditions in which they're living in. So this is where we're at now when I said this is historic times that we're living in. Folks are now faced with taking a number of steps that are going to change the dynamics in which we exist. And the question is, how do we do that? What are the tools that we have before us? Tool number 1, people say you can go to war. You can get some guns and you can go and find out who the enemy is and you can maybe shoot a few, but you're living in the United States that has the biggest army the world has ever seen. And as satisfactory as that may seem, if you've ever been on the receiving end of some sort of abuse, it's probably not the most realistic situation or steps to take. You can raise awareness and let people know what's going on. It's no accident that there are some people that, when you talk about politics, they're like, I don't want to hear it. I want to go to sleep. It's too much. I get that. That's not by accident, that's by design. Make the path to liberation or political liberation so boring or complex or so confusing that people will rather just walk away, smoke a couple of joints, have a drink, and do something else, rather than face something that can actually move the needle, so to speak. So it's not by accident, it's by design. But if we understand that that is just a camouflage, that's just a facade to kind of keep people away from something that we can actually conquer and overcome, then maybe we'll take a different tack. What do I mean by that? If I don't want people to come to a party that I'm having, this party's going to be lit. Everybody's going to be, there. But I don't want people in this room to come, because you're all from Laney College, and Laney College folks, they're going to want to eat my food, they're going to want to share, they're going to demand a seat at the table, and I'm not trying to do that. Then what I'll do is when I see you all, I'll be like, you don't want to come to the party. Why not? Well, I don't know where the address is, so I'll make it hard for you to find. Then, if you do get the address, then I'm going to try and say it's going to cost a lot. It's free for all my friends, but for you all from Laney College, it's $100 to get in. Then if you have the money, then I'm gonna say you don't really want to come. Why? Because we're not gonna be playing no hip hop, we're not playing Drake, we're not playing none of that. We're gonna play Beethoven, Bach. It's gonna be, it ain't that type of party for you all. So I'm gonna make it seem very unattractive. Anything to keep you from coming inside the house and realizing that it's just one person, me, and that if there's all y'all, then y'all get to change the way in which this party is conducted. So if you take that example and look at what's going on now, we say the political situation is something y'all can't change. Y'all don't have money like Michael Bloomberg. You don't have y'all don't have $1 billion. And your vote ain't gonna make a difference. If you go to the polls, you're not gonna be able to change anything. And you know what? I'm gonna tell you that all this political stuff, it don't make any difference. If you're living in Oakland, or San Francisco, or any of these places, it will never ever change. So I'm gonna make it so that it seems like anything that you do is gonna be hopeless. In other words, the name of the game is to take away all hope from people. It's a sight game. It's to get in your head and make it feel like that you can't overcome. So I'm here to say today, there's a history of that, but there's also another history. And that history is understanding that folks who have been oppressed over and over again have proven that they can defeat those who are oppressing them. I have an old saying that Goliath always loses. I'll repeat that again. Goliath always loses. There's a story in the Bible where they talk about this giant of a man, this tyrannical individual that was running around terrorizing people. He was huge, he was mean, he was smashing on folks. And people thought like nobody could defeat him, except one guy whose name was David, who carried 5 smooth stones. And what he understood was that giant is huge. He might not be able to go toe-to-toe with him, but if he hits that giant with a rock, a well-placed rock, he could take him out. And so he had that slingshot. He practiced and practiced, and he got his aim, and he knew that if he hit him right between the eyes, that giant would be taken out. And that's exactly what happened. So, that's a metaphor for what's going on now. Insurmountable odds. Somebody in the White House who seems like he's unstoppable. Politicians who are ignoring you. But over and over again, you see all these different movements that have popped up that have changed the dynamics. You have a bunch of young people, under 30, who now made it into Congress, starting with AOC out of the Bronx and a whole bunch of others. How did that happen? How did they beat folks who had lots and lots of money? They figured out the weakness. And they said, you know what? Y'all just partying over here. I'm going to organize over here. Next thing you know, I'll be in that position to start changing the game. You had the moms for housing that were just sitting over here at the forum where I was just watching them speak. People were saying, y'all can't change nothing. Y'all can't change what these developers are doing. Y'all can't change the tide of gentrification. But they went into an abandoned house, they studied the terrain, they figured out this was run by a developer, got up in there, made national news, and what do we see now? They're getting ready to start changing the laws. That is a Goliath versus David moment, where they were able to at least start the process of defeating folks. People in Ferguson, Missouri, 2 or 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, August of 2014, they saw what happened with Mike Brown. Killed in the Canfield Gardens, left to lie there for hours at a time. People who weren't political were watching this. People who weren't politicians saw this and said enough's enough, and they started kicking up dust. And they kicked up dust and figured out a way out of no way. They said they're not going to stop until change happens. They had been tired of all the abuse that they were experiencing. Cops pulling them over every time they drove their car, putting warrants out there. What do you have, a city that is 24,000, and they had 25,000 warrants from people because they were always being pulled over and then charged and quickly escalating to warrants. But this group of people in Ferguson did something that most of us have only talked about. I don't know if people know that they went to the United Nations to bring their case to the World Court, not once but twice. A lot of people don't know that. So we're talking about 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds that read some history, said Malcolm said bring these problems, Malcolm X, bring these problems to the World Court, and they did. And folks were forced to have a conversation. Barack Obama was forced to bring them to the White House and have these conversations about how are you going to change some of the dynamics around police terrorism. They just didn't stop there, but in about 5 different cities, from Chicago on over to San Francisco, the most recent one, they started changing the district attorneys. They did it in Chicago. They did it in not Los Angeles, they did it in Philadelphia. They did it in San Francisco. A couple other cities that I'm going to remember, they're fighting to do it in LA. But these were folks who weren't politicians. These were folks who were told that they couldn't make a difference. Nobody knew who their names were. Nobody cared. They weren't on TV every day. But they were able to look at the situation and said, our existence is a political one, and we're going to change the political reality in which we exist. Our triumph will be a political one. So that's what's happened. And we can start to go and name all sorts of examples all around where you see these changes coming day in and day out. Last week, I was in Richmond, California, and I'm listening to KCBS, and they go, oh, there's just a couple of hundred people, a few hundred people out here for the Bernie Sanders rally. I was like, wow. Looked at my phone, like that don't look like a couple of hundred people. There was 10,000 people. 10,000. Pictures, I sent pictures. Said, I'm a journalist too. This don't look like 200 people. This looks like, look at this people. All the way to the back. Folks on the outside. And, you know, it's like, oh, well, it was just probably some white folks that came out here. Said, look at this picture. Look at all these folks, black and brown folks. There were so many people there. I was DJing it. I thought I was going to play like Grateful Dead and Beatles and all that. I wound up having to play I Am Sue and Too Short with everybody going, yes. So Danny Glover was there, former Black Panthers were there, all kind of people. And the point that I'm saying is that you could feel that energy and you could see that people, a lot of young folks were determined to change the situation that they're in. Some of the folks that were at that forum were there. And all I'm saying is that if you understand that every Goliath can be defeated, no matter how insurmountable the odds look, all we have to do is find a weakness, and we can take them out. The Bay Area has been known for that. And I think if we forget our history, we can get caught up into believing somebody else's hype and not what is the DNA of this part of the country. This country has changed, this city, Oakland in particular, has changed the world. Home of the Black Panthers, home of the free speech movement, home of folks that, Black Lives Matter, one of the co-founders is from here. We can go on and on about the things that have been done. The Oscar Grant movement, all that is from folks who sat around and said, ain't no way I'm gonna take a loss. Ain't no way I'm just gonna let them do what they're gonna do to us and we not fight back. This making sense what I'm saying? And so if we understand that we have that sort of power in our DNA, that we can always overcome situations that seem insurmountable, and I'm just naming off the tip of the iceberg, then there's nothing that can defeat us. And so to bring it all the way back home to politics, and I started off by saying, the vote ain't everything, but the vote is a tool. So I started off by saying, you can have a gun, you can try and shoot it out, and maybe that's not going to work, but you can look and say, okay, I can out-organize, I can out-think, and I can be very strategic in how I apply my vote. So if I had a screen, I would show you something here, and I'm going to close out with this. It's a picture of Tupac, Snoop Dogg, and MC Hammer. And it's sitting at a rally a month before Tupac is killed. It's in LA. And in that rally, Tupac is talking about we fixing to start a new movement. He said, MC Hammer, who is, you know, at that time the highest selling artist, 15 million albums, he's gonna get us into the schools. Snoop, who has street cred, and Tupac, who had political understanding, we're gonna go to all these schools and we're gonna start our own party. So that was what they were talking about doing. And said, even if we don't start our own party, we're gonna get our listeners, the people who buy our albums, to throw a monkey wrench in the system. So we're gonna go to the polls and we're gonna look and be like, okay, you don't wanna end police brutality? Well, guess what? You don't get to stay in that position. Okay, you wanna bring developers here versus giving us affordable housing? We're gonna turn up and we're gonna move you out. This is what they were talking about. That's something that they didn't want to put in the news. That's something they didn't want to talk about. They want to talk about how he got shot, but they don't want to talk about the rally that he did. You can see it on YouTube. If you look around, you can see that. And as Pac was saying, it's like between him, Snoop, and Hammer, they said that's more than 25, 30 million people. It's our job to move the needle that way. It's our job to impact our audience. Now, to show you a practical way in which they applied this, and this happened a couple of years prior to this meeting, in the city of Berkeley, they put a moratorium on rap concerts. It was a fight at a rap concert. They said, no more concerts. And Pac and Digital Underground, they said, no, we're not going to have that happen. So what they did was they got all these other artists, and they went down to the Berkeley City Council. And I remember at that meeting, one of the members from Digital said, right now we got 2 million people doing the Humpty Dance. All of them doing the Humpty Dance right now. 2 million. We set a record for selling that song. So y'all better lift up that band before we have 1 million people singing a song about you and why you shouldn't be in office. That was the threat that they issued. So they wound up reversing that decision. And then Bill Graham, when he was alive at that time, he went and met with everybody and said, let's see how we can lift this moratorium, because they had it in Berkeley and they had it in Oakland, and right down here at the Kaiser Center, they went and redid the concert with Ice Cube and Too Short. That didn't happen by accident. That didn't happen because of the goodness of somebody's heart. That happened because there was a group of people that had sold 2 million records that said, we're going to start using these records to talk about you. We're going to put you on Front Street. We're going to make sure that you are a household name. And so as I close, I'm just, you know, we can talk all day and I'll take questions or whatever we can build. Politics is a combat sport. And on one side of the table, you have folks that are looking and saying, I do not want you, I don't want you, I don't want you, I don't want you or you to ever get in a position of power. So if I need to take your shoes and your shirt and your home and your kids, your food, whatever it is that I need to do, I will do it. Just to make sure that you never rise up. They call it creating a permanent underclass. Prior to that, it used to be called being a sharecropper or convict leasing or any other thing that would just keep us upended. That's on one side of the table. And the reason why they would do that is that they feared you talking to her talking to him, you talking to her, and then you're all looking around and go, you know, I had $10, you got $10, I got $10, now we got $30. She got a house, she got some guns, this brother here got a car, let's rise up. We don't want that. So I'm going to try and take things from you. Then I'm going to talk about, I'm going to create division. She don't like you. She don't like your red shirt. You wearing a suit. You ain't supposed to wear a suit. You need to dress like him. You two shouldn't even be together, so you try to do this divide and conquer thing. Don't talk to your brown brothers and sisters. Don't like your Asian brothers and sisters. You know, they're better than the black, you know, to do all that sort of stuff. So everybody kind of starts looking at each other cross-eyed. But if we are intentional about building bridges, and it'd be like, instead of saying, I hate that red shirt, and she go, where'd you get that red shirt from? And go, I make them myself, let's build. And where'd you get this suit from? And you know, we start building those bridges. Then that becomes very frightening. But remember, the name of the game is to keep a group of people down. Our job is to look at that and be like, evaluate the scenario, figure out how we can take, what's the weakness of the person that, or the institution that is holding this power, and exploit it to our mutual benefit. So that's what I leave you with. You can always outthink your enemy. You can always outmaneuver your enemy. Goliath will always lose. If you ever feel like you're overwhelmed, remember Goliath never wins. He always loses. Always. All you just need is one smooth stone that is well placed. And so it might be the vote this it might be the vote this Monday or Tuesday. It might be the vote in November. It might be the way we organize. It might be the support that we give to people. It might be putting a politician or somebody in power on notice that there will be a penalty, a political penalty, if you move from one direction to the other. But we can't sit back and just allow people to run roughshod over us. That's the name of the game. They want you to sit back and not be involved. I say be involved and turn up. So with that, I'll leave you with that to think about, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Davey D?
If you have any questions or comments, we can build. Well, let's talk about Nipsey, because I did probably one of his first interviews. Nipsey existence and his politic is the result of the gang truce of '92 that happened in LA, right? There was a truce that came about when folks were looking around and saying, we got a mutual enemy. LAPD is smashing on us. We don't have resources in the hood. And they're the deliberate attempt to keep us divided. And so, you know, there's a whole story about, you know, how Jim Brown and a bunch of people were holding these meetings in the House, and folks were figuring out how they can conduct themselves and have, you know, a way in which they engage one another. And so there was this truce. But it wasn't just a truce where you walk around and say peace. It was a truce. This is something they didn't tell you. After the truce came about, it was officially formulated 3 or 4 days before the Rodney King uprising, right? They went down 500 deep to LA City Council and said, we're all together now. We need money in our community. We need some different type of resources. We need a change in how the police are acting. We're united now. And the city council looked and it was like, oh, nah, y'all, we ain't trying to really mess with y'all. Y'all are gangsters. So they didn't do that. And the next thing you know, 2 days later, that verdict came out and all of LA blew up. But if you go online, you'll see the Crips and Bloods are talking. They started putting all their, you know, like we're united. They teamed up with the essays. And the police started to work to try and disrupt the gang truce. It's like, we can't have you all coming together. And they couldn't do it. But what they started to do was team up with some people. I think it was like Harry Belafonte was a part of it. Nadia Alejandro down here at Homies Unidos. All kind of people were like, let's see if we can get you to own your own businesses. Let's see if we can get you all, you know, a path to be independent. And to this day, many of those people have maintained that truth. And they've been able to have, more importantly, a line of communication. Now, I mentioned that to go to Nipsey. Nipsey is a youngster, right, who comes up at a time when he has bigger homies that are saying, we may have some personal beef, but it ain't like the funk that it was in the 80s and 90s. So now Nipsey comes along. The first interview I did with him, I said, how come you're not wearing no chains, no jewelry? And he goes, man, I'm not wearing no jewelry because that jewelry ain't worth nothing. I'm trying to invest in housing, right? He started talking about this, just like his first interview. Where we was at was Taraji P. Henson, Russell Simmons, Common, all kind of people. It was a summit that we were at, and nobody knew who he was. And we went and started talking. He was talking about this sort of thing, right? Huh? No, he didn't have none. He had a white t-shirt. You can look it up on YouTube. But the point is that he had already been schooled that there was more to it than getting a chain. Part of it was how the Bay Area operates, like you talked about Too Short men, Beneath 40, right? Those guys understood the art of hustle, right? So I've had 40 sit down and say you could buy 3 houses for $90,000, do them as a fixer-up, keep it in the family. You do that. Don't buy an $85,000 car before you buy a house. They said it in the song, right? But he actually came on the air and he talked about that, right? So the attitude was, we don't rock chains, we rock houses, right? We have house deed, we have property. So when you look at all these different groups from Hiro on down, they bought up property, right? If you go to New York and you look at the Rough Riders, they bought up property. If you see a lot of these artists, they were doing this the same way that we see people like Marshawn and them doing it. That's the thing that's not talked about. People are like, well, you beefing with that. No, talk about what are you doing with your money. Jadakiss, the Lots, all of them have done that. So with Nipsey, what he started to do, he was setting up a situation where him and other artists, athletes, and business people, black business people were coming together. And they were going to go in 10 different cities. And the formula was, we're going to take this money that we pulled together. I think T.I. has a construction company and a contracting company. We're going to start to take over these little malls in the hood where nobody wants to go. We're going to buy these malls out, and then we're going to put housing there for our community. And that's what they were starting to do, and that was the conversation that they were getting ready to have. Now, when this was happening, of course, the city of LA is like, oh, let's see if they're gang members. You already knew he was a gang member. He says it in all his songs. He says it in interviews. But let's see if they're doing some sort of illegal stuff, right? So that's what they were trying to figure out, and they couldn't get that because they weren't doing that. Everybody was staying clean. So the only thing they could do next is after he got killed was try to besmirch his name. Like, let's just put it out there that he was probably doing something shady while overlooking the fact that you've always had, people, we've had some very powerful people who did shady stuff that we honor, starting with the Kennedys and their bootlegging opportunity, you know, on down to some of these record labels that I've been a part of where I've seen them gun running, drug running, all sorts of stuff. And we're like, oh yeah, you know, they took their illegal business and they made it into something legal. Nipsey and them, these were gang members. They did everything that we said we wanted them to do. They united their community, they were pulling their resources, they were networking. He had already opened up businesses. They were talking like, okay, you're a gang member, but you're a businessman, let's all come together. What more could we ask for? It's up to us to continue, as he said, the marathon. It's up to us to tell that side of the story versus the other. Hold on one second, let me just give you another thing that people don't know. I'm from the South Bronx. And in that South Bronx in the 70s, all these buildings were burnt down. They were torched by greedy landlords that wanted to collect the insurance money. So in my neighborhood, you might have seen, they said maybe 30,000 buildings were burnt, right? So it was definitely a fire engine 3 or 4 times a day. What they never told you is that people rebuilt those communities, that they went back, they took over those abandoned buildings. We're talking about demands for housing, but people back there went and rebuilt those buildings. One of the people that recently did that took over a candy factory about 5 years ago and rebuilt that around my old neighborhood. When I say rebuild, it was like, you're a carpenter, you're an electrician, you do security, you know how to do art. They brought the whole community together and people took over these abandoned buildings. So the most recent one was built in the South Bronx. It became a community center for everybody that lived near Southern Boulevard. You know who closed it down? NYPD got upset because they had a mural of Momia. You can read this. I'm not lying. All this stuff I'm saying, you can Google and see it. It was, the group is called Rebel DS, and they had a picture of Momia on the roof of the building. NYPD does not like it. So they went and they talked to the mayor at the time. That mayor's name, Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg came and violently evicted those folks, and then they were looking and saying, well, you know, not all the I's and T's are crossed, and yeah, we know that this building has been refurbished and you all been using it for 4 years, but we're going to evict you because the city technically owns it, and that's how they got out. So it was a political move, but also understand that people are able to come together and do something that most people said we couldn't do. And that's just an example. I mean, they know how to do this better now. Just like the folks who took over those buildings, you know, some of them went and figured out how to own them, and you know, they've been fighting that fight. But the point is that they just didn't lay down and just take it. We should be aware that in black and brown communities, it's always been a dumping ground. I mean, from New York to Cali, it's like, we got all this garbage, we got all these excess chemicals. Should we go to Danville and dump it? No, let's go to West Oakland and dump it, and then turn around and say the people are sloppy, right? So you go all over Oakland, you're sitting there going, why are these people so dirty? Why do they keep it all unkept? No, why don't you come there at night and watch trucks come in from other cities and dump stuff right in there and then leave? They do that now with the encampments. So they will come there, they will dump their garbage near the encampments, and then we walk around going, these encampments, these folks in the encampments are sloppy, dirty. No, these are folks that are developers or contractors who want to save some money by not going to the landfill or whatever and spending a few $100s to get rid of their trash, so then they'll come here and they'll go to East Oakland, just drop the couch out, and then have a news people come along and say, oh, you know, black people in East Oakland, look how sloppy they are. They put their couches out on it. You know, most of us know you can't do that. I couldn't do that in my house in the South Bronx. I wish I could leave a couch outside. You know, folks would have been like, this is not, you don't do that. And I think most of us understand not to do that, but again, it's political combat, right? It's political warfare. So I'm going to create one set of reality, and we have to push back and counter that and say, well, that's not true. Here's the real reality. So some of it is raising awareness and letting people know these other narratives, and also being aware that there are folks that are determined to have us be depicted as crazy folks who have no sense. There's no more questions, and I appreciate your time, and hopefully it makes sense, so thank you.
Thank you.